Welcome back to Broxham, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the 6 essential Eldar Stratagems I hope to see in 10th edition. So as you guys know, stratagems are going to be seriously cut down in 10th edition, down to 6 specific faction stratagems and several core stratagems that are available to every army. And although I think this is going to simplify the game considerably, I also am a little bit sad to see some of these stratagems go. So without further ado, let us go ahead and jump right into the video. But as always, before we begin, let us just look at a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're basically just going to be going over my picks for the 6 Craftworld Eldar Stratagems that should carry over to 10th edition and why. We're also going to discuss a little bit of an extra here, but the Eldar rumors that have been circulating in a few places on the web. So many of you might have seen this. I actually saw this first on Auspex's channel. I didn't even know that these rumors were circulating, but after doing some of my own research, they are indeed, circulating on different kind of forums and places like Reddit and stuff like that. So I figured I'd at least talk about them with you guys, have a little bit of a laugh about them, and, maybe speculate a little bit as well. Okay, so I think we're going to get the first stratagem that I believe needs to be in the new Eldar Index in 10th edition out of the way first, and that's going to be Fire and Fade. So this is an essential stratagem to help high impact, high value Eldar units stay alive throughout the game. It is a steep command cost, typically at 2 command points, but I think this is a stratagem that should definitely stay in 10th edition. It is quintessential for Eldar to have, and I believe that without it, we would be at a severe disadvantage in multiple ways. Because as most of you know, Eldar are not the toughest faction, so we really rely on high speed and movement to get behind terrain and into safety. And it also incentivizes taking bigger units to use, which in turn can benefit from more buffs. So big units like, for example, D-cannons, which might not be affected by things like Guide and Doom, but can be affected by other stratagems like Resonator Shard and also things like the Black Guardian stratagem. And having bigger units of these, units of 3, really incentivizes using those stratagems on them, which of course also have the opportunity to benefit from Fire and Fade. Fire and Fade can also be used as a way to get extra movement to get yourself on an objective in the late game, or even get yourself line breaker early on in the game when a battle focus move of 6 inches just isn't quite enough. And I honestly think this stratagem has so much versatility, it has so much use in games, and to be honest with you, I haven't had a single game this whole edition in the 9th edition codex, so the new Eldar Codex, that I didn't rely on Fire and Fade in one way or another. So honestly, great stratagem. I think it's obviously essential for the Craftworld Eldar and definitely needs to stay in 10th edition. Next up, we have Phantasm. So Phantasm is an old classic. I love Phantasm myself. I've loved it ever since it was a Eldrad specific ability. And it basically allows Eldar units to redeploy. You can redeploy up to 3 units in your army. And this can give you a huge strategic advantage. And basically, you can use this to play mind games with your opponent. You can set high-value targets on one side of the battlefield, and then when your opponent sets their high-value targets on the same side to be able to counter them, you can just switch them over to the other side of the battlefield, and you can gain the tactical advantage, which is really massive. It can also be used to move units into reserve, preventing fragile units from getting taken out turn 1. So again, really great versatile ability that can help you in a lot of different situations in deployment, and also be able to put things back into reserve where they can not only stay safe, but also score on objectives in turns 4 and 5 in the late game. Which is honestly also a very clutch move that you can do with things like Rangers and Vipers to get things like behind enemy lines and even scout the enemy. And overall, just gives the Eldar some much needed adaptability when it comes to their deployment and their objective scoring prowess. And again, just like Fire and Fade, I don't think there's been a single game where I wasn't appreciative of having Phantasm in my back pocket. Now, obviously, I don't use Phantasm in every game, and you guys probably don't either, but it's always a good thing to have 2 command points spare just in case you need it. And that's going to go ahead and bring us to our next reserve-based stratagem, which is Webway Strike. So again, Webway Strike is a very powerful ability. It basically allows up to 2 units to deep strike. 1 unit costs 1 command point, 2 units costs 3 command points, and it gives units that, again, don't normally have good mobility options, deployment versatility. Units like Wraithguard, who would normally need to be put in a transport, which is very expensive, or would need to walk up the battlefield, or best case scenario, you put them in strategic reserve, and they can only come in on one side of the board, or basically the board edges, which is good, but it might not always be the best, especially in terms of versatility and where they're allowed to deploy. It's very easy for an opponent to screen you out if he knows you're coming from the sides of the board. So this, again, gives options to many units in your army that don't have good mobility options. But it also allows for some pretty cool combos and assaults out of reserve. So early on in the new Eldar Codex, when it first came out, a lot of people were basically using Webway Strike to combo with Ghostwalk to get turn 2 automatic charges or turn 1 charges out of a Falcon and things like that. And although, that has evolved over time, not as many people are using those tactics late into 9th edition, because basically a lot of codexes came out that kind of threw a wrench in the whole Webway Strike combination, whether it's through, increased psychic defense or whether it's through just the sheer ability to deny reserves. Either way, it's not as popular as it once was for assault units, but it is still a very cool option and very powerful combination if you can get it off. And regardless, it's just very thematic. If you think about it, it makes sense. The Eldar have access via the Webway and can strike from anywhere, so I really do believe that this is a stratagem that should carry over into 10th edition. Okay, so the next stratagem is actually a Harlequin stratagem. Now, I picked this one particularly not because it, really has anything to do with most Craftworld units, but to be honest with you, I think it's one of the coolest Harlequin stratagems and one of the coolest stratagems in general in the entire game. And basically what it does is it allows a Harlequin unit to move back into a transport after fighting. So basically the Starweaver, right? So this is a extremely powerful and flavorful stratagem that allows Harlequin units to evade damage in unique ways. And I think it's really awesome. It's really troll. I had loads of fun using it when I was running a Harlequin patrol in late 9th edition. And honestly, I mostly ran Harlequins at the time as an answer to Dark Angels Terminators and just, Terminators in general, because Harlequins are such a good answer to those types of units. But basically being able to assault a huge unit of Terminators or a huge melee threat, and before they could strike back, just hopping right back into the Skyweaver was absolutely hilarious. Really funny and honestly really fun to use and, very Harlequin. So I do think this should return. I do think Harlequin should still be able to use this because it's just frankly awesome and fun to use. And then, of course, we have the classic Bladestorm. So Bladestorm is something that a lot of you might be scratching your heads against and saying, well, that's not really a unique stratagem. We're basically already getting that on shuriken weapons with sustained hits. And although this is true, I do think Bladestorm in some form should stay in the game. And the reason why is because I really think it is helpful for Eldar units to have access to a stratagem that can boost their damage. A lot of enemy armies are going to be getting durability boosts in the form of, better armor saves like Armor of Contempt and things like that. So I think Bladestorm should be maybe even a -1 armor penetration value on your weapons, on your shuriken weapons, or something like that. Or, you could even, keep it with the sustained hits, but you could give it sustained, +1. So if it's, sustained 1, it'll become sustained 2, for example. And I think this will basically negate the kind of stratagems that are going to exist in the game that are going to reduce enemy damage. So again, also, I feel that this is a stratagem that is very Eldar feeling and very unique to the Craftworld Eldar. So I'm definitely hoping for the return of this stratagem in 10th edition. And lastly, we have Matchless Agility. So the reason I picked Matchless Agility was because I feel like if we get Battle Focus back, which we probably will in some form, it would be very good to be able to reroll that dice. Because as you guys know, ones do happen, and when ones happen, units die, right? Eldar units die. So being able to reroll that dice is going to be very important to making sure that we can get some reliable battle focus moves off during a game, which again could mean the difference sometimes between losing your unit completely and keeping your unit alive to fight another turn. Okay, so those are my picks for the 6 essential stratagems that I hope Craftworld Eldar will be getting in 10th edition. But let's real quick take a step back and talk about those rumors that recently surfaced about the, reveals this weekend about Eldar and about the other factions that are going to be put on display for 10th edition. So one of these rumors kind of popped up on the internet and has been making the circulation, has been making the rounds. And I actually saw this again, like I said in the beginning of the video, on Auspex Tactics that, basically went over this and kind of outlined what was in the leak and why he thought it was fake, essentially. Or at the very least, might be fake. So basically, it's just somebody posting this. It doesn't have any kind of screenshots or anything like that. It's just somebody posting and saying, well, I got to look at the armies that are going to be on display, and here's basically what it's about, right? There's going to be 4 armies on display: Orcs, Space Marines, Tyranid, and Eldar. And here's just a quick take I have on this. I think it's fake. It doesn't really make much sense to me because a lot of what's said in here doesn't follow the trends of the reveals so far in 10th edition, to be completely honest. However, I will say this. If it ends up being true, it ends up being a 1 in 1,000 shot that it's true, and it is, it could mean that Eldar are in for a tough start into 10th edition because these nerfs seem pretty severe. For one, it seems like Warlocks and Farseers, according to this guy, are going to be really bad. Now, we don't know what really bad means. Again, this guy doesn't go into any detail or define it at all, so that's another reason why I think it's fake. If somebody actually got a good look at the rules, they wouldn't just say they look really bad. They would say something more specific, right? They would say something more meaningful. Now, he does say that Farseers and Warlocks will be getting a 5+ invulnerable save versus the 4+ invulnerable save that they had before. Now, I also find this very confusing and honestly quite unbelievable. The reason being is because Warlocks and Farseers have never had worse than a 4+ invulnerable save in the history of 40k. So I kind of find it a little bit unbelievable that they would get their invulnerable save nerfed. And again, these are characters. Their invulnerable save is probably not going to matter as much in this edition anyway because they're going to be joining units. So I just don't see there being a reason for GW taking it down a notch. The other thing that this guy mentions is that Wraith units are going to be losing a toughness and their damage reduction ability across the board. Now, not only does this not follow the trend of what we've seen so far, as we've seen Terminators have gotten toughness 5, vehicles have increased in toughness. I don't see there being any reason as to why Wraithguard and Wraithlords would lose toughness value, especially since, again, vehicles and Terminators got a toughness increase. So, to me, that's really unconvincing, and I just don't see it really happening. Now, if in a parallel universe, tomorrow comes, the sun rises, and this actually is fucking true, which, again, it might be 1 out of 100 shot, right? If it is true, then yeah, I think Wraithguard and Wraithlords are going to be in a little bit of a hard place, especially if other monstrous creatures do get an increase in toughness value. And just think about it this way, a Rhino has toughness 9 now, and a Wraithlord, according to this, would have toughness 7. It just doesn't make much sense. Wraithlords have been historically one of the toughest units in the game. They're toughness 8 right now. They're just as tough as a Leman Russ battle tank. So once again, it just doesn't really make much sense considering that Wraithlords have historically been extremely tough, why they would all of a sudden be weaker or less tough than a Landspeeder, right, under the new rules. kind of weird. And I don't think this is the case, or is going to be the case come 10th edition. I actually think that most monstrous creatures will get a boost in durability just because of the fact that, vehicles are also getting a boost in their durability values. We will have to wait and see because they have not introduced us to any monstrous creatures yet. But, you guys, Tyranids are coming out. They're going to have monstrous creatures. And guess what? I'm pretty sure GW isn't going to just shaft over the Tyranids on release and give them a bunch of monstrous creatures with terrible toughness values and survivability. I'm pretty sure GW isn't going to do that to one of their, forerunning factions on release. Now, there are some things, again, that I can see. I can see the battle focus change. Now, let's talk about that for a second. What does that mean? So, basically, the leak says that battle focus will be limited to once per turn for one unit. And this is going to be the Eldar's army ability. And Strands of Fate is completely gone. And basically, battle focus is the only ability you get. And it doesn't have the assault part of it anymore. And it just affects one unit a turn. This would be a very severe nerf, right? But just follow me for a second here. I actually think that something like this may happen. I have a fear of it. And the reason being is I think this might actually be one of those cases where everything else in this leak is completely false. But this is one of those things that may actually be unironically correct. The reason I think this is because GW for a long time has had problems with Eldar in 9th edition, since their new codex came out, with being very uninteractive as an army. Now, I actually think most of this is not actually due to battle focus, but due to other units in the army, like swooping hawks, for example, and things like that, just being able to basically go wherever they want to and, being able to hide from the enemy army the entire game while still being able to do damage. Right? So I can kind of see GW missing the mark a little bit and thinking that it's a battle focus problem and not a swooping hawk problem, and nerfing battle focus. So I can see this actually, right? If you look at army abilities, the Space Marine army ability is obviously 10 times better than this would be, right? Oaths of Moment, giving your whole army guide and doom against a target is insane. But I can also sadly kind of see GW doing something scummy like this with battle focus. However, what I don't see is I don't see this actually working in the same way it did before. So if they do something like this, I can see them just giving the Eldar unit a 6-inch move or just a flat movement value of a certain type and not a D6. The reason being is because if they give them just a D6 movement, that's going to be shit, right? That's going to be terrible. So they have to give them at least something. If it's only once per turn, it has to be powerful. So if they do nerf it in such a way, I think it'll at least be 6 inches or something like that, where, you can move a unit fully each and every turn, kind of like a second Fire and Fade, if you will. If indeed Fire and Fade stays, which I think it should. So again, this would kind of, in a certain way, be better in some cases, but worse in others, army-wide. And battle focus might be able to affect other units besides just Aspect Warriors and regular Eldar. It might actually be able to affect units like Warwalkers. It might be able to affect units like Wraithguard and Wraithlords as well. We just don't know. So I can see GW doing something like this, but that's probably about the only thing that I find accurate about this leak at all. Because the rest of the stuff just doesn't seem to follow the trends of what GW seems to be trying to do in 10th edition. So that's my take on it. I think this is probably 80% bullshit and maybe 20% correct just by chance, right? And, anybody can just go on the internet, go on Reddit and create a fake post like this and make some predictions of their own. And, it sound kind of correct or maybe just a little bit correct, right? In some cases. And that's kind of the funny thing about leaks, is that if somebody goes on the internet and says even one thing that sounds semi-plausible, a lot of people like to jump on that and put legitimacy into it. So is this guy actually telling the truth about the edition? Absolutely not. 100% this guy's just bullshitting, hasn't even, looked at the rules or seen the rules and is just trying to create a stir on the internet. But are some of his points maybe close to being correct? Yeah, maybe. I could see certain aspects being close to being correct. But again, any player can be close to correct, right? It doesn't mean that that player actually has access to the rules. But in any case, we'll probably find out tomorrow and, knock on wood, watch me, just basically eat my own words here and everything be right. Could you imagine that shit if everything was right on this really fake looking leak? Oh my God, that would be the day, right? That would have to be like an apology video from me, like saying, hey guys, sorry I was wrong. This leaker was actually correct. And, how dare I ever, think that this anonymous person on Reddit could have possibly been mistaken. So hopefully the rumors, obviously, that surface regarding the Eldar are not true. It looks very suspect. And, like I said, in any case, we'll find out soon. So in conclusion, although I do like the reduction of the stratagems, it is sad to lose all of them. I don't know why. A lot of the stratagems didn't make any sense to me on when or where to use them. They were very obscure. It was a lot of rules bloat. But I have to be honest with you guys. I kind of liked using all the obscure ones, and I'm going to miss them, I have to say. Especially fusion charges. That was, honestly to God, one of the most funny things to do is charge your fire dragons in and use fusion charges on a vehicle for 2d3 mortal wounds. Very fun, and to be honest with you, very surprising to my opponents. So that aspect of the stratagems will indeed be very missed. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Stay tuned for more content over the weekend and next week. I'm going to be trying to cover as much of the new 10th edition reveals as I can and as they pertain to the Craftworld Eldar. So stick around for that. And thank you so much once again to all my patrons who have supported the channel over the last months. Thank you so much for your support. I will go ahead and leave my Patreon link and PayPal link in the description for those of you who want to support the channel further. And again, thank you so much for all the help. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out, and I'll see you guys next time. Have some great games over this weekend. See you later.